Alright, hats off, chewing gum with the bin, phones away, let's do this. This first video in the series on common errors is about issues that we have with rounding off numbers. In particular, what happens if we round off a number too soon as part of our calculation. So let's start off by just looking at an example here. If I have a circle with a radius of 75 meters, I know that the area of that circle is going to be pi times r squared. So it's going to be the same as pi times 75 squared. And if I want an exact answer, I can say that it's 5,625 times pi. Now, I don't know about you, but that doesn't tell me any sort of idea of what the number of squared meters is. So I would have to end up multiplying it by pi to have an idea of what the answer is. 17,671.458, and the numbers will go on forever. Now usually at this point, if we were after a final answer here, we would round off and say that's the same as 17,671 point, then it might be 0.5 squared meters, and we'd also say that that's one decimal place. So what we've just done there is we've rounded off. And we've said, well, the next digit would be a 4, but because of the 5 you have to round up. The rounding bit is fine, and I think most students know how to round correctly. But the fact is that we had to round off that final answer because to write it exactly with a decimal, we can't do it. These numbers run out on the calculator screen, but because we know how the number pi works, these decimals will never end. They'll go on forever and ever and ever, and the calculator just has to stop somewhere because we don't have an infinite calculator. You know how on your phone calculator sometimes you can turn it to the side and you'll get a whole lot longer string of numbers in your answer. So we had to round off our final answer here. But what if we now have to use this number for another calculation? That can actually create some problems for us because we've already rounded it off. We don't have an exact answer anymore. Some people would even round off pi before we even get to that point, and they'd end up with an inaccurate answer here. So let's work through a bit of an example. This shape, I want to find the volume of this shape. It's half a sphere on the top and it's a cylinder on the bottom. We know we need to work out the two volumes and we need to add those together at the end. Here, I have an incorrect working. It looks like we've done it right though. It's half of a circle, so it's going to be half of all of this string of stuff. And that's all pretty well correct, except that this 3.14 should still just be the number pi. 3.14 is close to what pi is, but when we're talking about some pretty big numbers in the end here, it ends up making it a bit inaccurate. I'll quickly show you by typing that out into my calculator. Pi times 75 cubed. So 883,000, oh, it's gone from being 100 to 500. So even though it was only in the decimals that you rounded off, it gave me an inaccurate answer here already. And we've done the same thing here where it's like, yep, 3.14 instead of pi, that should have been pi, times 75 squared times 27. That's the correct working for the volume of a cylinder. But the accurate answer is pi times 75 squared times 27. 447,000. Now we've got a mistake in the thousands digit. 887. Yeah, so we've ended up with an inaccurate answer, and both my calculator answers were bigger than these rounded answers, which means this part's wrong, and this part's wrong, and that last step is also going to be wrong. Now, realistically, in a test situation, you probably would have earned the mark already for showing correct working, but I know that most of my students, they lose their confidence if they get a wrong answer or an inaccurate answer. And I don't know why you shoot yourself in the foot by having an inaccurate answer on purpose. Here is instead a correct set of working. There it is with pi instead of 3.14. I've kept the string of decimals on the end of my answers here. And I'll show you in a moment how you can actually do that on the calculator so that it's even more accurate. But my final answer then, I didn't round off too soon. I only rounded at the very end here. That's where I rounded off my final answer. So, how can we avoid problems with rounding? If you have to do a calculation that involves any of these things, don't round it off until you get to the very last step of your process. So it might be if you've got pi in the question, it might be if you've got some sort of square root or cube root in the question. There are only a very few number of calculations with trigonometry that give you an accurate answer like a half or 1 or 0 or something like that. But most trigonometry answers will need some rounding. Don't do that until the end. And also, even if it doesn't seem like it might need rounding, but you notice a really long string of decimals, like let's say I worked, had a salary of $76,492 per year, divide that by 52.18 working weeks in the year. Yeah, that's a super long string of decimals. If I need to reuse that calculation, I won't round it yet, but I'll round it if that's the final step. The moment you see that the screen's filled up with decimals, it's probably not an accurate answer. It's probably just had to stop somewhere. So if you see a super long string of decimals, assume that you've got to keep that number. The other way to avoid problems is to save partial answers into your calculator. Let me show you how to do that. I'll show you using this example here. So if I've got a half times 4/3 times pi times 75 cubed. So that's given me an answer. I'm trying to get a good angle here, sorry. That's given me an answer. What I'm going to do is I'm going to store that answer in the calculator memory. So I'm going to go Shift to take the yellow one, and it says Store above the Record button here. And notice how you got the red letters A, B, C, D, E, F, X, Y, and M. I'm going to store that as B. So what that means now is I can use alpha to get the red letter. B, I can put it on my screen, and I can get the answer back. Or, even better, I can work out so pi times 75 squared times 27. Yep, I've got that as my other answer. I'm going to go Shift, store it, and I'll store it as D. Why not? So what that means I can do, I'll just check that's in, alpha D, yep, cool. So I can actually go alpha B plus alpha D, and my calculator will do the final step of calculation for me. And I can then do the rounding because it's my last step. So I didn't have to retype those numbers because the calculator saved it where I told it to save it. It's a pretty neat trick to get yourself out of trouble. But bottom line, use your calculator to help you, and don't round off until you get to the very last step of your calculation. All right, enjoy.